What's going on, everyone? It's me, Troi, and I'm here again with another video. So listen, first I gotta say that this is a video that is probably a rapid fire wrap up because these are the books that I read in the month of July. Actually, I wanted to dedicate the month of July, given that it's the middle of the year. I wanted to dedicate it to reading all the 2025 releases that I bought prior, to catch up. So I did that instead of doing this instead of doing the mid-year freakout tag. So that out the way, I do want to mention a booktuber channel named Reading Through the Generation. This individual tagged me in a summer barbecue themed book related tag. Hopefully I get a chance to do that tag, but in the meantime, I want to make sure that I still shout this channel out, and I appreciate the shout out and the mention of this channel. So anyway, yeah, let's get this going here by just jumping right into it. And the first book that I want to share that I read, that's actually the second book that I read this month, but the thing is I filmed this video last week and then pieces of the files got corrupted. So, y'all, most people who watch my channel know that I just kind of tell it how it is about how I feel, whether I'm right or wrong about certain things. So the general gist of it all is that my feelings come straight off the dome. I'm much more of a reader response critic, I guess you can say. So I did read Junie by Erin, Crosby, Eckstine. Okay, y'all know what I'm saying. But I did read Junie. Of course, this cover is so magnetic or magnetizing or whatever. Junie is about this. It takes place right before the Civil War, so there are murmurings about that event about to occur within this time frame within this book. But Junie is a slave girl with a number of different tentacles in certain areas, if you will. One thing we have to, of course, look at is Junie struggling with, her mother and her father, their particular, fates, and in relation to not being with her. So she's subsequently left with like her grandfather and grandmother on this plantation. Junie's biggest trauma or biggest sense of guilt and remorse has to do with the death of her older sister, which occurred a year earlier. This sister saved Junie from drowning, and she subsequently contracted some kind of disease that ultimately killed her. And Junie is a slave girl who resides primarily within the house, the main house, because she is the close. I don't want to use the word friends, but she's close with the daughter of the house. They're about the same age. They grew up together, and Junie has the advantage of being able to read and write, and thus she is soaked into the passions of poetry and literature and language, which of course is detrimental to her well-being should that get out everywhere. So one of the things that is clear within this book is because of her ability to read and write, she's often, though very much given warmth by everyone else, her grandmother, her grandfather, her family within the plantations. There's always this sense of her smartness, her intelligence coming across as insolent or rebellious or disagreeable. So she does have that dynamic going on within her family. But of course, there's still, insurmountable amount of love for each and every one of them, even though they try to often kind of talk reason to her over her passions, talk reason to her over her desire to sort of launch herself off. So the core dilemma within this book has a lot to do with Junie trying to thwart the arranged marriage of her the daughter of the house, because they're close. And if that marriage were to happen, Junie would move away from her family, move away from her home, and of course be in the situation in which she's not going to be having access to books and literature and things of that nature. So one of the things that occurs within the story that sort of gets into motion Junie's ability to stop this from happening is that a boatload of magical realism takes place in the form of Junie's sister's spirit coming to Junie and giving her these tasks that was ultimately lead to Junie's freedom, if you will, just to kind of taper it there. So what did I think about Junie? To be quite honest, at the beginning of the book, I was still in that phase of gathering what exactly is the direction. And then there was also this kind of sense of just kind of sense of worry in terms of Junie being able to read and write, and how it doesn't seem that much of a gravity, or I really kind of didn't get the sense of what kind of pressure that would bring within her environment. So it kind of, I don't want to say the word like felt unrealistic, but there was still not that sense of danger that I was hoping for, because that is such a, taboo thing given this particular time frame. But ultimately, like, I didn't really kind of gather a sense of the direction of the book. And what's interesting is that when the magical realism element came in the form of Junie's sister coming back in the form of a spirit, and subsequently, like I said, giving Junie these particular tasks, which will unravel a number of different secrets, some paternal secrets, some secrets that the sister put into motion, like I said, in terms of seeking freedom. And then, of course, Junie given this choice of, should she seek freedom for herself? Could she bring her family along, even despite their mind frames and their comfortability on the plantation? Lots of different avenues in which you can explore that. But my resounding point is that for someone like myself who is not really into magical realism, in this kind of context or space, rather, who isn't really into dream sequences and going into these different realms that it's misty and you're walking through the fog, dreams, dream, ugh. I always say I cannot stand books with a lot of psychics and visions and headaches in them. That is the part, the magical realism part of this book is the part that really made me sink my teeth into it and dive deeper into further engaging myself with this particular story. And I think that had a lot to do with the sister actually giving Junie these very direct situations in which Junie had to enact in order for her to, for us, the reader, to get to the conclusion of the book, or to find, the various riddles and mysteries of what it is that the sister was hiding before her death. That just gave it the grounding that I really hoped for, that I wasn't really finding in the beginning of the book, because really it was just like this headache about, will this daughter of the house get married, such and such and such. And she herself has a lot of secrets that you would probably see coming. But anyway, ultimately I enjoyed Junie. I love that it was a story told through, the slave girl who was willful but had this passion for being able to intellectualize, poetry and literature. Even though, like I said, it put my back up. Like, girl, how far can you get away with this in this particular time frame? So anyway, I love Junie. I think it really kind of well rounded itself out by the end of the book too, as well. And I love the fact that despite her sister being deceased, there was still that combativeness between the two, where they didn't see eye to eye on a lot of different things. So the next book that I read was Murder by Cheesecake by Rachel Ekstrom Courage, which is the first book in her Golden Girls Cozy Mystery series. To be honest with you, I could say a lot of different things, but I think it's too easy to say a lot of different things, disparaging, a lot of different negative things, because I think that given this iconic TV show with these iconic characters and this slew, this mountain, this ocean of various scenarios and scenes and lines that one can pull out of, and the humor, the wit, to put this all or condense it all into a book and try to reimagine this particular character, this particular, we can just say the whole core of Golden Girls into like a book, is a feat that I do not envy anybody having done. I couldn't do it any better than this author. But with that being said, I only got about 100 pages into this book before I had to switch, but I was still determined to finish it, before I had to switch to the audiobook version, which I found much more appealing. Because if you look at the premise, the setup, it has to do with Rose putting together this wedding for one of her nieces that's going to take place in Miami. And adjacent to that is Dorothy going on a blind date, and the person that she ends up going on a blind date with is found murdered within the freezer at this wedding, at this hotel that the wedding's going to take place. So that's where all the mystery elements come in. But unfortunately, I hated all of it. I didn't care for any of it. The wedding babble just kind of got on my freaking nerves. I was sick of hearing about it. I was sick of all the side characters. You know, Rose's niece, her fiance, the fiance's family who owns the hotel, the various just characters in general. All of them, couldn't stand them. Didn't care for any of them. I wish they would all go away. I wish the wedding scenario would go away too. I was almost like, why did the author pick a wedding to be the core theme of, you know, some orbiting the murder mystery? Like, why are we do? I would prefer something else but a wedding right now. And second to that, I found that when we kind of look at the characters of Rose, you know, Blanche, Dorothy, Sophia, the really person who carried this book, the character who carried this book mostly was Rose. Secondary to that was Dorothy, and then I really found the character of Blanche and Sophia to be just kind of lacking, kind of just there to throw these various different one-liners or barbs in between all the other shenanigans taking place within the plot. That was disappointing, and I was really hoping that this book would have found a balance between all four of the ladies so that we can kind of enjoy them in this form outside of the TV show as we normally would within the TV show itself. But like I said, that is a feat that I don't envy anybody having to do. And ultimately, yeah, it really didn't spark too much in me. I couldn't read it after 100 pages. I couldn't read it anymore. It had to switch to like I said, switch to audio, and that was much more pleasing. Although it still wasn't of this spectacular, you know, bring out the confetti and the ribbons and the bunting and stuff at the end of the day, for us having first received a novelization or novelized or novel cozy mystery of the Golden Girls in book form or whatnot. So yeah, Murder by Cheesecake was just, I don't, like I said, I mean, honestly, it wasn't really talking about nothing, to be real with it. It wasn't really talking about nothing. Occasionally I found myself laughing, but you know, it wasn't really talking about nothing. But I still have respect for the the endeavor within itself, and I will pick up the next book that comes out regarding that. So the next book that I read or partially read was also a book that I had to switch to audiobook form, and that was Harlem Rhapsody by Victoria Christopher Murray. I have to put it here. I recently donated the book. Hopefully that video, which I did film, will come up sometime. In the meantime, you'll know where that book is at, which is going to find itself a great home. I promise you that. So this is a fictionalized telling of W.E.B. Du Bois's relationship with his editor at the Crisis magazine. Her name is Jessie. These are real historical people. I think I'm not really sure how much of the actual plot, the relationship, the affair that Murray drew up to place within this book. So I don't know how much is elaborated and how much is real, but it essentially is that fictionalized or fictionalized view of that particular relationship. And while I did enjoy this book, unfortunately, that affair kind of just drove me to the audiobook form. There's two things that, if I really kind of look at it, there's this parallel here that I enjoyed of the actual history of seeing Jesse's plight, if you will, to bring forth more black voices in literature, as an editor, the Crisis magazine. She's a historic figure who was very prominent in the creation and the expansion and the accessibility to black authors, black poets and whatnot, through the magazine and the whole publishing field within itself. So she was very core and present in that. But I loved how, as we look at this book taking place in the early 1900s, how certain events related to something as an example, like the Tulsa massacre, how the character of Jesse regarded that, and we saw that within the text. See, stuff like that I really enjoyed. I enjoyed her getting to know, some of the greats that we know of, like Langston Hughes. We got to see her relationship with him, or the buddiness of that relationship. Like I said, I would really have to, I can trust that these things happened, not being thoroughly knowledgeable about Jesse, but the book begged, I guess you could say, for me to do more research to see much more of much of an influence she had. But like I said, that's one thing that I enjoyed. But that affair with the Langston Hughes, the W.E.B. Du Bois, the relationship, that affair was something that's really, although I can't be mad at it because it was true as far as I know. It was something that sucked a lot of the life out of the other areas of the book that I did enjoy. It was cumbersome, if you will. But like I said, I really can't really have an issue with that because that's what happened. It was the reality, right? But yeah, I decided to just switch to the audiobook version to ingest the book after maybe about I think I was almost kind of halfway through at that point, but I just kind of realized that um I wasn't as engaged with it as I wanted to because of that sort of green light, red light, green light, stop, go pattern of being interested in the history and then being discouraged by the relationship. But eventually, Jessie did kind of grow a backbone, and she didn't exactly get what she wanted, but nonetheless, that came so late in the book that it was just like at that point I was kind of done. Period. I was kind of over it all. But I do suggest this book as an introduction to these characters, to these people, actually, if anybody's interested. Somebody who just generally reads fiction and nonfiction, and hopefully this would influence them to go and pick up some much more nonfiction material that help really flesh out the story between W.E.B. Du Bois and his mistress, Jessie. So that's all I really got to say about that book.